Nietzsche is a dark figure to read. He attacks so many of our foundational principles that we feel ground us and make us human. He attacks democracy, Christianity, science, and all of our greatest philosophers. But if we can understand his critiques, we will certainly come out the other side much stronger. So if you're ready, let's go beyond good and evil. To Nietzsche, philosophers are dogmatic creatures. They use prejudices to come to their conclusions, and oftentimes these conclusions say more about them than it does about truth. Plato is no exception to this. Nietzsche speaks against Plato's pure spirit and his form of the good, which Nietzsche sees as one of the most prevalent errors in philosophy. Plato thinks that there is a world of forms which contains all of the perfect versions of everything that is. We only perceive the reflections of these forms with our senses, like shadows on the wall of a cave near its entrance. The problem is, this assumes that there is an unchanging essence to all things, but Nietzsche believes that the universe is constantly in flux, and that there is no essence that we can pin down at any point that is consistent eternally, or at least nothing that other philosophers have adequately pinned down. The other major issue that Nietzsche has with Plato is that Plato values the form of the good as the highest of all forms, which we must build our morality upon. But we cannot actually tie down this good and use it as a foundation for our morality, nor can we be sure that the good is desirable and that therefore morality can follow from it. Philosophers generally use circular logic that requires a leap of faith, namely that good is preferable. If rejecting the father of Western philosophy wasn't enough, he then criticizes Christianity. To Nietzsche, Christianity is pure slave morality. But what does he mean by that? Well, in ancient Rome, the rich and powerful were revered and seen as above the weak and the poor. This is what Nietzsche considers master morality. Christianity tried to say that slaves were equal to kings in the eyes of God, and that the weak and the poor were actually living godly lives. So much so that ascetics commit to poverty, abstinence, and denunciation of all earthly pleasures, which supposedly brings them closer to God. They then try to justify their weakness by claiming to be morally superior to the rich and powerful, and they attempt to shame them into obedience. This is slave morality, or the morality of the herd. To Nietzsche, slave morality spread through Europe like wildfire, and it made Europe lose all of its vigor because it taught us that being weak was okay. And now we live with these sterile and cowardly lives, just hoping that eventually we'll be rewarded in heaven. Today, we have a new form of atheistic religion. Even as philosophy and the birth of modernity have turned us away from the traditional God-centered religion, to Nietzsche, we are actually more religious than before. Ancient religions demanded the sacrifice of loved ones, often through execution. Later religions demanded the sacrifice of self through the giving up of freedom and our desires to God. Christianity introduced a new invention where we sacrificed our own God, and now, with our God dead, we worship science and the material world. Science is just the logical conclusion of Christianity, and it has made us even weaker still. He correctly guessed that this new development would lead to a deep nihilism, which would bring about the worst wars that the world had ever seen if we didn't manage to find a higher goal. Science is built upon the idea that we can find objective truths about reality, but what if there are none to find? Nietzsche's view is quite a bit different. His is that of perspectivism. We can think of this as the difference between a photograph of a statue and a 360-degree panorama of that same statue. The photograph would be one perspective of the statue, but what about all the other nearly infinite number of ways to view the statue? To Nietzsche, there is no absolute truth, just an infinite number of perspectives, and because of this, both science and morality fail. He has a great quote that there are no moral phenomena at all, but only a moral interpretation of phenomena. End quote. So, what can we be sure of if we hold Nietzsche's view of the world? Well, essentially, nothing. So much so that in fact he attacks Descartes, famously saying, "I think, therefore I am," which attempts to posit that the only thing that we can be certain of is that in order to question what is true, there has to be an I which can be doing the questioning. Nietzsche points out that we can't actually be certain that there is a singular I that is doing the thinking. I mean, how can you be certain of where your own thoughts originate from? This leads to his idea of the will. Nietzsche believes that wills are the guiding force of the universe. These wills are inside of everything, both animate and inanimate. In fact, we are filled with wills which are in competition and attempt to dominate one another. Because of this, he doesn't totally buy into the idea of free will, which is commonly characterized as a central I, which does both the commanding and the obeying. Nor does he believe in "I think, therefore I am," because the I is just a number of competing wills and no single individual. A very simple way to think of this is that the will of a lion is to eat, and the will of a gazelle is to stay alive, and oftentimes the lion has the stronger will. In fact, all organic processes are based on the subjugation of weaker wills to stronger wills. This example, however, isn't totally sufficient because you have to remember that every being has a number of wills in competition with one another inside them, to the point that every choice that they make is one will winning out against all of the others. The strongest of these wills is our will to power, which attempts to help us understand how there's so much domination in the universe. The person that punches someone in the face does it for power through their strength, and the person that gives a friend a gift also does it for power, even if they don't know it, because the person who receives the gift is now indebted subconsciously. Even ascetics have a will to power. Through self-denial of all pleasures, the ascetic supposedly gains knowledge that the rest of us can't obtain, and as it is so often said, knowledge is power. So where do we go from here if we have no morality? Well, we have to take a look at his idea of free spirits. These free spirits can free themselves from dogmatism, faith, science, or any other prejudices that previous thinkers may have had. A free spirit should be able to look himself in the mirror and question all of his assumptions. If this free spirit can get rid of all of these assumptions, then he can gain near endless knowledge. It should be said that to Nietzsche, knowledge and truth aren't necessarily linked. Knowledge isn't a fixed perspective like truth is. It consists of looking at things from all perspectives. Philosophers that have a free spirit can actually create the values of tomorrow, because moralities impose order on the world, and thus, philosophers can create a new world order. In that way, they are both creator and legislator. This leads us to his critique of democracy. Democracy assumes that we are all the same and should all follow the same rules. It inherently pushes down the exceptional because the exceptional will always be in the minority. It also shames anyone who gets too much power, while in actuality, those who can wield power should do so. In fact, Nietzsche believes that society exists just for the few strong men who can rise above and shatter our illusions, and not the herd. Sadly, free spirits are inherently isolated in a civilization of weak men. They must use a mask whenever amongst the normal people, but when they are alone, they must shed all allegiances to science, religion, morality, prejudice, their nation, and anything else that clouds their thinking. A true free spirit will only be strengthened by his suffering. A true free spirit must be capable of sublimating his will to power when it is necessary, though. In fact, the people that can't sublimate their wills are basically barbarians. So instead, we must find the balance between barbarian and slave. An example of proper sublimation is a man who desires a woman. He can give in to his will to power and make love to her immediately, and then be on his way feeling that he possesses her. Or he can sublimate his will to power for a time and make her really fall in love with him to the point that she is willing to do anything for him. And then he will possess her for life. This, of course, is assuming that she falls in love with the real man and not some character that he's playing, which she could uncover at any point. So, are you feeling nihilistic yet? Well, Nietzsche believes that nihilism could either be your destruction, or it could be exactly what sets you free. He asks us to envision the universe as a pattern of eternal return, where our meaningless lives repeat over and over and over again, which would drive many people mad. But if you can delight in this empty repetition by affirming all that is good and all that is bad, then you can overcome nihilism. Now that explanation only scratches the surface of what's so interesting about this book, so here are a few more things that you can learn from it. Nietzsche believes that language generally fails to adequately describe the universe. Language inherently is a simplified expression of biases. It can't possibly express the countless perspectives of any subject, so instead it simplifies the world into subjects and predicates. He criticizes nationalism and its ability to breed mediocrity, though he does believe it brings about a few free spirits. Nationalism tends to make people only think from one perspective, which clouds their judgment. He also thinks that the fact that there aren't pure Germans is a benefit, because it makes their spirits mixed. He even believes that someday Europe could be united into one country. He segregates societies into pre-moral, which means that they care about consequences of actions, and moral societies, which are ones that care about the intentions behind the actions. He wants us to aim for an extra-moral world, which cares more about the wills behind the actions. He also believes that there are masculine races like Romans and Germans who impregnate other cultures with their creative impetus, and then feminine cultures like the Greeks and the French that take in the spirit of other races and attempt to perfect them. Despite his anti-Semitic sister, he actually believes that the Jews have the strongest of all wills, and that is why anti-Semitism has risen, because the Jews so easily take over other cultures. Criticisms of this book often come in the form of pointing out the fact that he heavily generalizes about groups like women or Democrats or Christians, while saying that we should look at things from all perspectives. Though I should point out that actually he does make a few jokes to this effect in the book, so it seems that he is aware of that. The book ends with a poem by Nietzsche that frankly isn't very good, but it does give us a better look into his mind. It tells of a man on a mountaintop addressing his friends. He tells them that essentially he has been in a struggle with himself, God, and basically everything else. He is now stronger mentally and physically than any of them. His friends decide to leave him, which makes him realize that he must move on from these old friends and await his new friends, which can match him. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope that you enjoyed this video. Please check out my website, westernrenaissance.com, which I will link down below, where you can see the written version of this video as well as all my other videos and short stories, poetry, things like that. And again, my goal for this channel and for the work that I do is to help revive the West. I feel that we are in a time of crisis right now where things seem to be on the downturn, and I want to keep the best of the great tradition alive. So like, comment, subscribe, and let me know what you think in the comments below. Thanks so much.